Yeah, very good presentation. There are a couple of things I wanted to get clarified for our viewers. I didn't hear tonight. We mentioned about the Tabor refund. Where in the budget is it showing that money, where's it coming out of and going into? Like what page, that sort of thing. I mean, we verbalized it, but I couldn't find it in the budget itself, and I think people would probably be interested in knowing where that's at.
Oh, sure. Larry Dorr, City of Lakewood Finance Director, and it will be quite a ways toward the back where we enumerate the transfers, page 527 at the top, and you'll see a transfer schedule for the 14 revised. It's about halfway down the page there, and it's that 1,277,365, page 527.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. There was a mention about an $850,000 for a federal center consulting study. Who is doing that study?
I'll ask our Director of Public Works, Jay Hutchison, to see if he can add some detail to that. I'm not familiar with that specific study. I think there's some spending happening around the development and redevelopment, of course, of the Fed Center, but I'm not aware of any happening. And maybe you could refer to, was it referenced in the city manager's budget?
Yeah, city manager's budget, yeah. Well, and also in the 50,000 projects in the back as well.
Okay, let's see. If you could, Councilor Wiechmann, if you could guide me to that page.
What specific page in the budget, Dave? Did you find that figure?
I have to admit it doesn't immediately come to mind.
Well, let's let him answer. He raised the question.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Page 821 or 521.
Okay, bear with me just a moment. I'm on that page now, and forgive me. I think you said 840,000.
850 for a federal center consulting, and I guess related to that, there's one right above it for 60,000 for a federal center legal.
Yeah. I do see that, and yeah, I beg your pardon, Mr. Hutchison. It does appear to be budgeted in our Economic Development Fund, so I'll ask our Deputy City Manager, Nanette Nealon, to address that. Thank you, Mr. Hutchison.
This is for the anticipated work at looking at the Fed Center, and we budgeted out of Economic Development and future costs for doing all the studies for the investment, informing of the area project development, including attorney fees for 2015.
And who's going to be the vendor?
That is yet to be decided. First we budget, and then we would go out through a process to find the appropriate consultants and legal counsel.
Okay. Stormwater fees, we're going to be talking about that later. It mentioned on page 451 that we got $2.4 million from urban drainage. Does urban drainage make significant contributions to our stormwater projects?
I'll take that, being on the urban drainage board. As we've heard over and over again through this discussion of stormwater management utility in the city of Lakewood, one of the benefits of having this utility is the ability of having matching funds for the urban drainage and flood control district to help us with these badly needed projects. Dave, the money from urban drainage actually is returned to Lakewood taxpayers in the same proportion that we pay to urban drainage. If you check your property tax statement, we all pay a little bit of money to urban drainage. That money now can come back into the community for specific projects. So it's taxpayer money that's coming back to Lakewood.
Well, the reason for asking for the question is we had talked about the millions of dollars of projects we still needed to do in the future, and so my question is, are we going to be having to pay for all that ourselves from the stormwater fees, or will urban drainage be contributing a portion of those expenses? And if so, and I guess we're getting ahead of the game.
Yeah.
We'll discuss that when stormwater comes up.
Right.
So, but
To answer your question, urban drainage will continue to pay fees in the same proportion as our taxpayers contribute to them, as they do now.
Okay. On page 79, there's a pie graph, and then of course some numbers. And I was wondering if I'm missing something here as to why the pie graph percentages are not matching their percentages that come from using the numbers. For instance, the example being the police department is our 2015 budget is anticipating that the police budget will be, as a portion of the total budget, will be 26.33%. But the pie graph is saying it's 29.7%. So I'm wondering why looks like a discrepancy.
We present the budget in a couple of different ways. The police department has spending, so we'll present the spending in a given department first based on the general fund only, then based on sort of its all funds relative to all funds spending. So sometimes a lot of data presented all at once, but if you notice that the police department has spending out of special revenue funds, be it grants and others. So it could be that the dollars and the percents, one of the two is referring to the all funds, meaning special revenues and grants and other things, and one is just the general fund. But certainly would take another look at the percentages to make sure we've got those two connected. But I can tell you that the police department budget is very carefully organized in terms of all the spending and the line items and so forth. But we'll look at the possibility of having a discrepancy in the graph. But we present all funds and then general fund only.
It's not a discrepancy. As you just articulated what the difference is. The difference is that one is a percentage of the general fund and another one's a percentage of all funds.
Okay. Speaking of all funds, we've talked an awful lot tonight about the general fund, but on page 65, we're talking about the all funds. And it's kind of interesting. It, does a 2-year process, 2013, 2014, 2015. So over 2 years, if I'm reading this correctly, that's why I'm asking you, it looks like our revenues in essence have gone up 9.3% over the 2 years. And then for expenditures, it looks like our expenditures for 2 years are going up from $141 million to $177 million. That's a 25% increase over the 2 years. And I guess the biggest question mark is when we get down to the bottom, we have a deficit. If I'm reading this, it looks like we have a deficit of $16 million in 2014 and $15.5 million in 2015. So I'm trying to reconcile those different numbers.
Sure, thank you. And if you look to the page just to the left there, page 64, there's a representation of all 22 different funds that make up the all funds budget as it was. And as I mentioned earlier, the funds other than the general fund are restricted for a specific use. And of course, the general fund makes up more than twice the spending of all the other funds combined. Yet if you look at the list, one of the things that you see here is our significant capital projects funds. So what you have in capital projects, interesting, they take multi-years. We've been talking about the one happening here at the Civic Center. And obviously there are projects that are funded pay-as-you-go, and there are years when the revenue accumulates, and then there are years when the spending occurs frankly, in large chunks. So this is not unusual. This is fairly common and according to plan. But what you have are large capital projects where funds are spent in big chunks. And we also conservatively budget to spend project funds early and up front, so that in the event that construction is ahead of schedule or the weather is better than predicted, we have funds appropriated and available to keep the projects moving. So I think if you look back, the next tab is the Fund Summaries tab, and it will have a description of the revenues and expenditures of each of those, and you will indeed see that there are capital spending projects happening, not just in the capital improvement fund, but if you look at the CIPP, you'll see quite a few projects happening in the utilities and in equipment replacement. So it's this funding that happens around capital projects, and it just so happens that we're planning for more of those to occur this year and next year with revenue that's already accumulated. Okay?
What we ought to be doing is congratulating some of our staff for going out and acquiring some of these grant funds so we can spend more money to make improvements in the city of Lakewood.
Okay, moving from questions, the budget is also an opportunity for us to state what our priorities are. And, one of my priorities, as well as the community's, is public safety. And we have said that our goal is that we should spend 30%, at least a minimum of 30% for public safety. But when looking at the 2015 budget, I'm seeing that our percentage of the budget is 26.33%. In 2013, it was 29.83%. And so as a percentage of the budget, that's a 3.5% drop in the relative position of our police department. And that, of course, is contrary to the direction I would like to be going, especially with marijuana concerns and an aging community, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think we want to be reducing our relative footprint, but perhaps increasing it. Now, I know when we talk about public safety, we also want to throw in the courts and the city attorney. But the courts, we have it at 1.78%, and the city attorney at 0.91%. Adding all that together is only 29%. So we're still not at the 30% level.
Is that 29% of all funds or 29% of general fund?
Well, whatever it is defined. If you go to the page for the police department and all these categories.
Yeah, I think you're looking at page 343, which would be the all funds. So if the city gets a $20 million grant for parks and recreation, the all funds budget would go up $20 million. So the police department's percentage of the all funds would decrease. So the idea is that if you look at the general fund or the operating fund of the budget, I think the police department itself is over 40%. And then you'd want to add to that, of course, the courts and the prosecutors, not the entire city attorney's office, but the prosecuting office. And I think you'd find that it's well in excess of 30 on an operating basis.
If I may follow up on that, and the chief is here, I don't think got to be really careful with that wording, because there's a decrease in the percentage doesn't directly correlate to a decrease in agents on the ground. There may have been, and I think in 2013 there was a project that took place, a capital project that may have increased that budget. So I think you got to be really careful when you throw that out in generalization, saying we don't have a priority on public safety because we've decreased. Well, what was that decrease? And can you speak to where that decrease was, Councilor Wiechmann? That's concerning, because I don't think it was agents on the ground.
So look, this is just a parlor trick with numbers, and we're talking about all funds, and has been stated over and over again, all funds could include multi-million-dollar grants for highway improvement projects, for acquisition of parks and open space, and what we ought to be measuring is its relationship to the general fund, which is our discretionary fund. So if you have a motion to make, please make it, or otherwise go on.
All right, it's going to the city manager's budget. We have an increase in the budget from, again, over the 2-year period, from $2.65 million up to nearly $5 million. So it's an increase of about $2.3 million. And as a percentage of the budget, and of course, I guess we're defining what budget, according to the numbers that are in here, it's saying the percentage is from a little under 2% to a little under 3%. So the relative portion of the budget is 1% or an 88% is now going to the city manager's office.
Page are you on?
I could go ahead and address this, Mayor. It appears page 173, and it was one of the things we were just discussing. And the city manager's office expenditures are made up of not just the general fund, but also the economic development fund. And as Deputy City Manager Nealon just addressed, there's an increase in spending around the development of the Fed Center to be funded from the economic development fund. It's still a part of the city manager's office, so that's what's driving that increase. You see that the spending in economic development alone really accounts for the lion's share of the increase there. So page 173 is just we just discussed that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I guess I would like to make a motion. Going back to that page 521, those dollar amounts, the 850 and the 60,000 for the federal center. That is property we don't own, and for us to be spending nearly $1 million to basically develop that is putting the city in a position of being a developer. And I think that's something that a real developer ought to be doing, or the federal government. And I don't think it's the place for the city to be the developer of the federal center. And I do not want to authorize that almost $1 million for those federal centers. So I would like to make a motion to remove those two funds, that's the 60,000 and the 850,000.
Totaling. I mean, specific on your motion, please.
Well, the total would be 910,000.
All right, we have a motion.
I'll second it.
All right, motion and second, discussion. I don't even know what to say. Please cast your votes. Just did. Please cast your votes. It's for consultants and attorneys, and we're in the process in the final stages of acquiring the property. So I don't even know what to say. Please cast your votes and let's move on. All right. The motion fails 1 to 9. The nays are Murphy, Shakti, Roybal, Johnson, Quinn, Paul, Barroway, Kellen, and Harrison. Next, Dave.
Yeah, last motion is, again, going back to my values of I very much like to support our employees, and I'm of course a big believer that money talks, and talk is cheap, and so I would like to show our appreciation for our employees and give a year-end bonus of $100 this year. I calculate that if we've got a little over 1,000 employees, that I think probably $120,000 would cover a $100 bonus for all employees, both part-time and full-time, that have worked for 1 year. So
Okay. Do we have a second on that?
Yes, Mayor, I'll second it.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Paul and Quinn.
Just a matter of process. Once again this year, we have a city council study session where we go through the budget as well as a public hearing. Councilor Wiechmann, why don't you bring this stuff up so that we have time to throw it in the budget and have discussion about it? I mean, what if there were other things that we wanted to do? What if you wanted to raise the percentage? I mean, why do you throw this out tonight?
Well, because it's appropriate for me to listen to all the testimony from staff and from all the public input, and that was not finished until this evening. And so it's appropriate for me not to be jumping in until I've got all the facts. And that happens at this point. This is where we have our debate, this is where we have our discussion, and this is where we vote. And therefore, I'm not going to be premature. I'm going to wait until I see what the whole picture is.
All right. Anybody else? Councilor Harrison?
I appreciate Councilor Wiechmann's idea about valuing our employees, but I don't think that is our job as council members to do that. I think that's the department heads and our city manager's job to make those bonuses appropriate for those people if bonuses were needed, or any kind of pay strategy is not my job. I appreciate the idea of valuing our employees, but I don't think it's appropriate.
Thank you. If you read your charter, it would support what Councilor Harrison just said. Councilor Quinn, anything?
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. And it comes out the same, 1 to 9. And the nays are Murphy, Shakti, Roybal, Johnson, Quinn, Paul, Barroway, Kellen, and Harrison. Anything else? Anything else on the budget? All right. We have a motion on, we voted on several amendments, passing one. I would ask you to vote on the approval. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Paul.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and
That's all right.
I just want to say there's so many components of this budget, and we heard about the process. But I just really want to thank the staff and city manager and all the folks that do work on this budget for bringing it forth. I mean, another great year, adding reserves, doing a lot of good things, keeping costs contained, providing top-notch public safety. So thank you to all those involved, and it's been quite a process.
Mayor
You're here.
Murphy.
Shakti? Oh.
Please, I beg your pardon, I didn't want to interrupt the council's discussion, but I did want to address a question that came up 2 weeks ago at council's public hearing of the budget from a citizen related to the city code, and I've brought that along for the meeting. I just want to address this really briefly, and this relates to purchases $50,000 and over. And one section of the code was quoted, and there are actually 4 sections of the code that relate to those activities. And I wasn't able to reach Ms. Kentner on the phone. We corresponded briefly on email, and I thought I saw her here, so I may catch her after the meeting. But I just wanted to let the council know that, one, this is an area that I know is particularly important to the council. When we've looked at the procurement policies every 5 and 10 years, this has not changed. This has remained in place, and I can tell you that the projects that were referenced are within compliance. I just wanted to say that very briefly, and I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt the discussion, but wanted to get that on the record as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. Shakti?
I just wanted to say a couple things about the budget, and it's hard to know what to say at these meetings because, as has been said, we've had a number of meetings on the same topic. But without being repetitive, as I think the echo of collaboration is really good to hear in all the different departments. So we hear with in the police department, we have the new record keeping system and the collaboration happening there. Some of us just went on a tour of the regional crime lab. And I think that